Good morning, and welcome to Real Human Design Stories, where we share real-life stories of how human design has helped our guests know themselves on a deep, transformative level. Whether you're joining us live here during Sunday Story Hour in my Facebook group or catching this on your favorite podcast platform on Mondays, you'll be able to find all the details you need in the show notes or the Facebook comments. By knowing and trusting ourselves, we develop deeper, more honest relationships and unlock our true gifts. I'm Kathy Bashanko, and my guest this week is Maggie Ostara. Maggie's a 2-4 sacral generator, right angle cross of tension. And she's going to tell us her human design story, and then we're probably going to talk about her awesome book, Feminine Sovereignty. So, Maggie, I'd love if you just dive right in, say hello, and tell us a little bit about your human design story, how you found it, and all that good stuff.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you for inviting me, and welcome to everyone who is here and who will be listening and watching this later. And my human design story begins in about, let's see, when would that have been? That would have been maybe 2011, something like that. I was first introduced to human design through a coach I was working with at the time. And I was full on building a big business coaching business. And she had been introduced to Chetan Parkett. And so she was like, hey, you guys might want to go check this out. It's interesting, But there was no real explanation or anything. So I went and I got one of those, $15 printouts you can get that tells you the fundamentals of your chart and all that. And I saw that it said that I was a generator and that I'm designed to respond. And my response was, well, this is clearly inaccurate because I'm an Aries sun and I have been initiating my entire life and I'm clearly designed to initiate. So this must be focus. So I dismissed it in my arrogance. I just went, no, that's not me. And it wasn't until a few years later that I guess it was probably 2016, something like that, that I had burned out again, because I have a history of burnout, had 3 major burnouts, that I went, maybe there's something to this human design stuff. And so I circled back around to it. I also was in relationship with somebody at the time, and we were just having a lot of struggles, and we didn't really know what was going on. And we thought, well, maybe human design will help us to understand. And if we had gotten human design earlier in our relationship, it might have made a difference for our relationship, but it actually kind of came in too late. But it was enough to whet my interest. And I was kind of at this point where I had let go a lot of things because, like I said, I had burned out and I had just let go a lot of things. And I was like, I got to really do my life different. I don't really know how to do it different, but I know I need to do it different. So when this came around, I was like, well, what does it even mean to respond? Like, what does it even mean? And I thought, well, I don't know what it means, but I'm going to not initiate for 2 months. I'm just not going to initiate. That was the one thing I could kind of get a handle on. I even had a conversation. I mean, I did a reading with somebody who was pretty proficient in human design and spent almost the entire reading talking to him about what it meant to respond. I still didn't, even at the end of that, I was still like, I don't know. I think you just have to live this. So I stopped. I didn't initiate anything. And what I realized in a relatively short period of time was that there were lots of things for me to respond to. There were things all the time for me to respond to. I had just never really thought about how I was operating as responding. But it was like a turn on the lens, you know what I mean? And all of a sudden you're looking at things through differently. And it took a while for me to get it more. And then there was a whole nother layer where I had to I'm like, okay, well, so I'm designed to respond. I have things to respond to, but how do you respond? Oh, sacral. What does sacral response mean? And how do you do it? And what does it feel like? And all of that. So that was a lot of inquiry for me for a while. And I was also listening to audio recordings of Ra, the founder of Human Design. I went in and I bought a program of his on generators. So I was listening to him talk about generators. At some point, I came across Karen Curry Parker and got on her email list. And as we all know, she likes to share a lot. So I got a lot of email from Karen. And it was when I got an email from her that was talking about having an open emotional solar plexus and how difficult that is for children. I just went, that's me.
Yeah.
Because I channeled the suppressed rage of the people in my family. And I didn't know, like, I was kind of known as a rageful kid, but I'm like, why? I don't even know why. I can't think about why I had that. And so when I got an email from her that talked about how for kids, it can be really challenging because you have no idea what's going on, right? You're picking up other people's emotional energy and amplifying it, even if they're not expressing it, right? Even if it's suppressed. And I went, oh, that's what's been going on for me all this time. And so that was a real eye opener for me. Those two things got me interested enough in human design that I was like, okay, there's something to this. And that's when I really started studying more. And when I did the professional training with Karen and, really kind of dedicated myself to it. But I would say, just to also answer the one of the questions you had, which is like, what is it that really has changed your life the most, right? It was, and this was pretty far in, like all of the things definitely stimulated my interest, started revealing things to me that I didn't really understand before. I looked at kind of my history at one point and was like, well, was I responding or was I initiating? And I realized there were a number of situations where my perception had been, because I'd never really thought about it, honestly, is that I'd been initiating. But I thought, no, actually, I entered into it through response.
Yeah.
If I really know what response is. So that was one piece. But the other thing was, and this was in a ways, was realizing that I have a predominance of individual circuitry. And that's when I went, oh, I'm not designed to fit in. No wonder I've never fit in. No wonder I've always wanted to do my own thing. Well, no wonder I've had all this drive to kind of be bringing through the new, looking for what's next, being on the leading edge, not thinking different than other people. Because, for a lot of my life, I was like, why am I like this? Like, what is it about me? And I had no answer except this just seems to be me. And when I realized how much individual circuitry I had and that this was really it's one level of my purpose, right? Is to be that kind of person who is channeling what's next on the leading edge. I've got the gate 12 defined on an open throat, which in human design is the mark of the channel, right? And so I was like, oh, that's why I'm like this. So that actually gave me a comfort in my own skin that was probably in some ways the biggest thing that I've gotten from human design was that piece about individual circuitry. Yeah.
Yeah. And you're also cross of tension,
Mm-hmm.
which I think adds to that feeling, of tension, right? Of within a group, like, because you're here to push people to be their better versions, right? In this way that, I have a lot of individual circuitry too, so I can relate to that. And I have a daughter who's a cross of tension manifester. So, and as you're talking about the experience of the undefined solar plexus child, I'm thinking of my undefined solar plexus cross of tension manifester child and me, her defined emotional mother, trying not to show all the emotions that I had, trying to parent as a undefined sacral. It was a lot, I so wish I had human design, yes, as a child, but definitely as a parent, it would have been amazing. And I'm so happy for all the, I was going to say envious, but no, I'm really happy for all the parents who now have all these wonderful tools at their disposal that some of us didn't. So I want to see, let's back up a little bit on your, you said you were working with a coach who introduced you to this, but you come from academia. Mm-hmm. And where were you at in your whole career journey at that point?
At that point, I left my job at Columbia in 1998. So it was a long time ago. I was there for 5 years. And so This was in the, like I said, around 2011 was when
Right.
she introduced it to me. So I worked with her from about 2009 to 2013 or so. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what were you doing at that time?
I was building a large business coaching business called Soul Signature Success. So it was like a soul-inspired business coaching business. I had, big group programs and lots of private clients, and I did that whole thing.
Right.
That whole thing.
So once you found human design, how did that impact how you acted as a coach? Like I shouldn't say reacted, your response coach.
So I by the time I really started studying human design, I was no longer doing that business because I had burned out doing it.
Oh, you said that.
Yeah, I had majorly burned out doing it. I had 40, 50 clients at a time and, year-long program. I mean, it was a lot. And I didn't have it grew really fast and I didn't have an adequate infrastructure or an adequate team. So it kind of went, shh.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And I kind of went. So by the time I came back to human design, I was in a pretty fallow place, if you will. I had let that business go. I was doing some consulting, but I wasn't really running a business in the same way that I was before. So, yeah. And what else was the part of that question? Oh, you're asking how did human design influence how I work with clients? Was that the question?
Yeah, because now, obviously you have built a business now where you coach, educate, work with clients in a beautiful way. And I'm obviously, that's different now as you understand yourself through the lens of human design. So what did it teach you about that whole sort of thing?
Well, human design is an incredible tool to reveal to us some of the key characteristics that I would say even, like, first of all, generally, not someone's specific design, like what's defined in their chart and what's not, but just the system shows us where humanity is evolving into, right? It is an evolutionary tool for humanity as a whole because we have the entire chart in our system, right? And what differs is what's defined and what's not, but we have the entire chart. And so I really use the whole system, not just, a lot of times people look at a chart and they think, oh, the only parts that matter are the parts that are colored in. It's not true at all. Like your openness are huge, can be huge superpowers. So for me, I look at the whole chart, how somebody is defined inside of there, meaning, are they in relationship, conscious relationship to the ongoing energies that they have, which is their definition. Are they in conscious relationship with that or not? That's always a good place to start, right? Because it's like, for me to realize, wow, I'm actually in a really dynamic relationship with the flow of life. And that's what it means to respond, right? It's like spirit and I are like constantly connecting and working with each other. And for me, that was such a huge change because I always thought it was a good idea to work with spirit, right? And I'd done a lot of advanced meditation and I, done a lot of things where I felt like I was connecting with spirit to a degree, but human design actually gives us really specific ways that we do that depending on our type and our strategy, right? And our authorities. It gives us step-by-step ways of knowing how do we work with spirit. So I use it for those purposes to help people get really connected into that creative intelligence of the universe. But then also, one of the things I'm really keen on now, because it just became, after doing 3 years of transit reports, I'm so aware now of the distribution of the gates in particular, but the whole system into different circuits. And we have 3 primary ways of knowing in human design, right? And only one of them is logical. Then we have our right brain creative embodied intelligence. And then we have the knowing circuit, which is the largest subcircuit in the whole chart. It's huge. So only 30% of our ways of knowing are logical. And yet our culture teaches us that that's 100%. So a big thing that I do when I look at a chart and I'm doing a reading or I'm working with clients, I'm like, what's the distribution of their definition in these primary ways of knowing? And my experience is that many, many people have a lot of creativity and a lot of intuition they are not using.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're not even aware of it because they're so conditioned into that left brain dominance, which is what culture teaches, Western culture teaches. And so a lot of what I do first is just look at that and go, do they know how intuitive they are? Do they know how creative they are? And also, are those aspects of their lives that they want to grow and cultivate and expand? Because you can do it even if it's not defined in your chart. Like I just have one gate in the sensing circuit defined in my chart, but I have a very deep relationship with the entire sensing circuit through all of the embodiment work that I've done over the years. So this is why I say I don't just look at definition. So anyway, I don't know if that's getting too technical, but it's just like for me, I feel like we need to release ourselves from cultural conditioning that is trying to slot us into certain ways of being that actually disempower us. Left brain dominance disempowers us. We want left brain intelligence, but we don't want it to be the only thing that we have access to, right? It needs to be in right relationship with everything else. And I see people become very disempowered in their lives when they don't know how to access their intuition and their creativity. So that's just one example of how I use it when I work with people.
Yeah. So I've been reading your book, and I wish I was a faster reader in some ways, but I'm not done. I'm about, so your book is, for those listening, the book is called Feminine Sovereignty. There we go. 8 Pillars to Understanding Ourselves and Our World, right? Is that?
For regenerating.
Right? The way you were holding it gave you...
Regenerating, I know. Regenerating ourselves and our world.
Sorry, I was trying to go from memory, but yeah, that's even better, regenerating. So I am just finishing up the 4th pillar, which is the end of the first part. So can you explain just briefly the idea behind the 8 pillars?
Sure. Yeah. So the 8 pillars are a step-by-step path of personal development that begins on the inner landscape. So the first 4 pillars, which you're saying you're just finishing, are all about the inner landscape. They're about our connection to spirit, right? And then our emotional wisdom, our embodiment, our vitality and connection to the living world, and then our energetic mastery and radiance. So those are the first 4 pillars that are really about how do we grow ourselves so that we have the inner stability, the resilience, the power, the intelligence, the ability to be in charge of what's going on in here, because there's a lot that goes on in here, right? And so so this is the part where you're saying about understanding yourself. This is really about the understanding yourself part, is that, right? But then we also grow ourselves, because a big part of the book is about growing ourselves, not just about releasing conditioning, but actually building our capacity. So that's the spiral inward, which is the first part of the book. And then we start to spiral outward, and we start to move out into the world with other people. And then how do we do that? So the 5 pillars, 5th pillar, which is the first part of the second part, that was an awkward sentence. Okay, let's just acknowledge that. Okay, so the pillar 5 is about purpose and contribution, right? Purpose is a personal thing. Contribution is how we bring it out into the world. So it's really kind of the fulcrum point of where we go out into our relationship with the outer world. Then pillar 6 is communication that connects. Then we have mutually beneficial collaborations. And ultimately, how do we step into stewardship of our world? Because we are here at a really potent and critical time on planet Earth. And our Earth is calling for us to kind of wake up to the way we've been, devastating it. And we need to change our ways around that. So that's where the stewardship comes in, is how do we actually look at healing and regenerating our living world, and take our right relationship of having responsibility and obligation to taking care of the living world, which is, of course, a major tenet of indigenous populations all over the world, but that got really suppressed and rejected under the Age of Empire, which is where we've been the last couple of thousand years, where we've really been extracting and from people as well as the world, right? So we're evolving out of that now. And this is a path that helps us to actually do that. So we spiral into the outer world with those pieces. But I do reiterate throughout the book that even as you, for example, when you go out to communicate with people, you may need to spiral back into pillar 2, which is emotional wisdom, right? Because it's when we are in relationship and talking to people that sometimes we get triggered, right? And then we're like, oh, what just came up? I'm talking to this person and I feel offended, or I feel grief, or I feel anger, or feel whatever, right? Something comes up. So then we need to spiral back in and go, okay, what's going on for me that this is how I'm reacting? And how can I learn and grow through recognizing that? Because usually there's an unhealed part of us that's the source of that reaction, right? So then it gives us another opportunity to heal and to grow at another level. So it's not, even though it's presented, I say this at the beginning of the book, because, when you have a book, it feels linear, right? You're going from page 1 to page 460 in this case, right? It seems linear, but it's not a linear path because it spirals in, it spirals out, it spirals back in, it spirals back out, right? It's a spiraling path. I really wanted to express that because I think a lot of people feel discouraged when sometimes they're out in their life and something comes up and they're like, I thought I healed that.
Right.
Or I thought I'd gotten through that. Or I thought I had, I already knew what that was. And now I'm better. But usually what that means is it's not that you didn't heal at that level. It means you're ready for another level, right?
Same level, new level, right?
Something else is now. Well, and a lot of it is, the way I hold it is, you have grown enough that now you can handle the next level of your development.
Yeah.
And because we can't grow and heal all at once. It has to happen in stages. And so that's this thing about the spiral is we come back to, let's say you have a, abandonment wound, right? And you come back to it, it gets triggered again, but you're not in the same place because the last time you were here on the spiral and then you had this time where you lived, boop, there it is again, but you're in a different place. So you get to heal at another level. Then you get to go into that, that heart space and see what's happening there and take care of yourself, grow and heal that part. And then you can spiral back out again, having done that work and then that creates you into yet another new person. Yeah.
Well, I can tell you, I have it's interesting the things that have come up as I've been reading this book. This really is an amazing book. Someone said this sounds like such an incredible book on Cara Rose says, and it really is. And I feel like it's a perfect time for us to be talking about it because it's this Virgo moon energy, right? Which is really calling us to understand our inner connectivity to the earth. And but when I was reading it, I couldn't help but just have this awe for the way it's written. Like it just really spoke to my soul in a way that it's interesting, the little things that come up too, that little voice I'm still healing that says, you're going to talk to this woman, and it's like, I'm not still that person who thinks everybody who has something to say is someone I should be intimidated by, right? But that little voice still, when I read your book and was so like moved by the things you were saying, there was that thing. And I was like, oh, this is something for me to heal right here. This is another opportunity for me to see that I am spiraling and moving up and doing, through this whole creation of these podcasts, I've reached out to people that there's a part of me that says, who do you think you are? Right. And what I have said is, I know who I am and they don't. And if they don't want to talk to me, that doesn't mean I'm not worthy. It just means they don't have time. They don't know me, whatever. And I've been able to let go a lot of that, sort of, you know what I'm talking about, that inner voice.
Good for you. Yeah.
But,
no, exactly,
but she came up again. She came up again when I was reading the book, but I was like, I love this book so much. And I wish that I had it when I first found human design, because it's very simple in its human design language. So like it doesn't, like if somebody were to read this book and they had never even ran their chart, I would recommend you go and run your chart, and you can run your chart lots of different places, including my website, and get your chart. And so that way, when you're talking about what it means to have a defined will versus an undefined will or you can look and go, oh, I have mine's white, so that's open. Look at that. That's fine. But even if you can't do any of that, the language you use is really approachable. And it's not the only tenet. It's one tenet. It's not a pillar, because the pillars are different things, but it's a tenet of each pillar, probably, right? I haven't read them all.
It is included in every pillar.
Okay.
But it's more strongly represented in the first 4 pillars, because that's more about the inner landscape.
Yeah.
Although I do talk about leadership later on, and I talk about in communication, I talk about the throat, right? The different types of throats there are in human design, for example. And I also talk about types of leadership when we get to pillar 8, which is about stewardship. And I actually claim Gate 21 as the gate of stewardship. And so, yeah, which is nobody else has done that, but that's my take on it. It's my son, so I get to do it.
Right.
But it's more heavily represented in the first 4 pillars. And I'm really glad that reading this through, you're like, oh, somebody who doesn't know human design could get it. Because my coach, I had a book coach while I was doing this, and she doesn't really know human design. So she was actually a good reader for me, because she would be like, I'm not, whether she'd be like, great, I got it,
Right.
And so, because I wanted people ideally to be stimulated to want to find out more about human design, but also just to be able to get what it was I was talking about without necessarily having to stop and go do a class on human design or something like that. I do have a thing in there where they can go and get their chart, and they can get some supports for human design. But yeah, it is one of 2 major wisdom traditions that are included. But there's a lot, as you've seen, just having read there's many, I draw on many, many different sources and perspectives in the book.
And, my favorite thing is the way you wrap up each pillar with the little, what do you call it?
Your turn. Or your turn section. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the sovereignty score, where you ask some questions about the, I don't know how you would explain.
It's an assessment. Yeah, there's an assessment.
Right. And so that was really helpful. But I like the way it's not just an assessment the way I typically see them. I liked the way that you had okay, here's the positive things. Where do you assess yourself on that? Here's the shadow. How do you assess yourself on that? And then what's the difference between the two? Because that was really a good thing for me to look at and say, okay, I can see where in this positive this one, I still have a couple more things to do. Oh, but look, all the shadow things, I don't that's a 0 for me. That's, that made me, you know what I mean? It's just, it helps you to see the balance of things, so.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes, because people have told me this too, is that they think they're good on something, and then they read the shadow or the disempowered, because there's actually 3 aspects.
Yeah.
Is they read they think they're okay on something, but then they read something about the disempowered aspect in a pillar, and they're like, oh, I actually do have that. I may have a bunch of the positive things, but I also have, I do give my power away that way, or I do beat up on myself in that way, or whatever it is, right? And so, because what's different about how I do this piece is I call it a spectrum of expression. And there's 3 aspects, because what we tend to do in human design is just talk about 2 aspects. We talk about the awakened aspect, or the empowered aspect, and the shadow aspect. But what I found just, doing this work for a long time and working with people is that what we call the shadow aspect is way more complicated, because sometimes it's about how we're disempowered around something, like people, for example, reject their emotional energy, right? Because emotions are not okay in culture, right? So we reject the power of our emotional energy and our emotional solar plexus, when it's actually a huge creative force that we want to be able to grab a hold of. But so, for example, people reject that, or they reject their leadership, or they, reject different things. That can be very disempowering. And what I say is the shadow aspect is when we activate the energy of a particular aspect, But we do it in order to manipulate or control either other people or situations. So we're doing a power over strategy, right? So one's disempowered and one's power over. So this is the paradigm of empire that we've been living inside of, right? It's either you're the ones who are in power, you get to decide and you get to, control other people, or you're the one who's got that coming at you and you got to figure out what to do about that, right? So that's what we're stepping out of into the more empowered and awakened aspect, which is not power over. And I think this is a key distinction for people to make, which is that for me, building your inner landscape, the power in the inner landscape gives you the ability to operate in the world with other people as sovereign beings. So I would recognize you as a sovereign being. You would recognize me as a sovereign being. We get to share and rotate power, right? Rather than trying to control or manipulate each other, right? Which is how we've been largely trained. So I find it really useful to break that down into 3 different aspects rather than just 2. And so in the spectrum of expression for each of the pillars, I do it in relation to the pillars, not just human design, right? So are you empowered around your relationship to spirit? Or a lot of times people reject their relationship to spirit because they grew up with a religion that doesn't work for them anymore. Right. So they just kind of went, man, I don't want to deal with any of that, right? But then how do you create a new relationship with spirit that works for you on your terms? Like you get to be sovereign in that relationship, but you don't necessarily know that that's available if you're in this kind of, disempowered, rejecting state with spirit. So each of the pillars has an assessment like that. And then it also has a way that you get to read what the expressions look like. And then there's an invitation to be like, well, what would you like to grow in yourself? Like if you're like, I have a friend who read the first pillar and she was like, I'm good on all of this, but I don't have a regular spiritual practice. I don't, right? And I was like, well, that's your growth edge. There you are. And the last time I talked to her, she said, you know what? I just changed my bedroom. It's so funny because she has altars all over her house, but she didn't have one she sat at.
Right.
Right. And I was like, and she said, you know what? I redid this altar and now I have a place to sit, to be at my altar. And I'm starting to sit and just be with myself. And I'm like, yes. So that was just a way it gave her a little window that she then got to assess and decide if it was important to her. Like I'm not in charge of her. Right. But I get to say, have you thought about this? Because it could really help. And for me, a regular spiritual practice is so important. There's a whole chapter devoted to it, which is later on, the daily date with the divine. So yeah, because to me, Kathy, I really wanted this book to be something that people engaged with and interacted with, and not something that they just read and went, oh yeah, okay, great, on to the next. And so that's what the your turn sections are about, is to say, hey, how is this landing for you? Because that's how we actually grow, right? It's not just from absorbing information. It's working with stuff. Yeah.
And I think that's really key just to the whole, you and I talked a little bit beforehand about the whole idea of the human design experiment, as the whole purpose is to get us in touch with ourselves as the authority. We know what we need. Our body has the wisdom. And the way you present this does not feel like, here, let me tell you what you should do. It feels like, here are these things and how now you assess yourself. What do you want to do now? In a way that feels really empowering. And so I do really love the whole book. There were times though that I thought about it and I thought, oh, there's so many men I know who could benefit from this stuff, but they're not going to read it probably because of the title.
They might if you tell them, because it's really, there's only a couple of sections in there that are really specifically talking about women, right? In the chapter Pillar 3, where I'm talking about embodiment. And, I do specifically talk about women because as women, we lost our sovereignty under patriarchy, right? I mean, we literally lost our ability to control our bodies, right? And so I talk about that there, and I don't talk about men, but I've had different people read this and say, oh gosh, this is for men too. I'm like, absolutely, share it with your men friends.
I think
Not just for women at all. Yeah.
Which pillar it was, but when you were talking about the patriarchy and how it affected men and the way they deal with their emotions, maybe that was an emotional wisdom. That really made a lot of sense in how men are only allowed to express, or at least were only allowed to express rage and I don't remember.
Excitement.
But then there was
like at a sporting event, right?
Yeah.
Excitement, right? So that's a place, and then anger.
Right.
And men have a very, and that's one of the things I always like to say is, look, patriarchy it screwed men too, most men, right? It's an ideology, a hierarchical ideology that moves power and resources upward to a very small number of people. And those people are men generally, right? But there's lots of men who are also subordinated under patriarchy and certainly under empire, right? And so it's not like a system, I'm not anti-men. I don't think men are the problem. I think the ideology is the problem and the way that we've been conditioned by it. And so that's a lot of the project of this book, is to help us kind of surface these ways that we are still living inside of these ideologies, these worldviews, if you will, right? Belief systems. And how so that we can surface them and go, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize that I was acting out this old paradigm that I consciously don't agree with, but there's some way that I just did this thing. Like, let's say I just dominated a conversation, right? And I didn't even realize, oh gosh, I really wasn't listening, for example, or I got activated and then I, wanted to control the situation. Oh gosh, because that's part of our conditioning, right? And so helping us be like, okay, not so that we can make ourselves bad and wrong, but for awareness, because until you get in touch with that and you realize that, you can't change it, right? And as women, for centuries, we've been taught to manipulate men.
Yes.
Right? Mm-hmm. Manipulate men, because that's the only way we could gain power, was through manipulation. And so that's deep in and compete with other women, right? And that's deep in our psyches. And so, we're here to try to heal that stuff so that we can actually relate to each other. But we have to become aware of it first and realize, oh gosh, I am acting this piece out, right? Or I subordinated myself in this situation. I believed that this person had more expertise or more understanding, more power than I do. So I subordinated myself to them. This can be very subtle, but we do it all the time, It's like, wait a minute, why did I do that? What?
You're the expert, so my opinion doesn't matter what I have to offer.
Exactly. And one of the big things I do, I'm sure you do this too, and as we're human design, support people, is I'm always saying, like, when I'm coaching people or something, I'll be like, here's a recommendation. Here's something I suggest you do. I still have a lot of people who come to me for some kind of business coaching or relationship coaching. And I'm like, try this out, see how it lands for you, but run it through your own system. Does it resonate, right? What does your sacral say? Or what does your, whatever your self-projected, your heart say, or whatever your authority is, like, how does it actually feel in your body? Don't think that I'm the one to, tell you exactly what to do. I'm here to give you recommendations and suggestions. And yes, because I have the gate 51 in my chart, I will help disrupt your patterns. But I'm not here to tell you who you are. I'm not here to tell you what you should do. I'm here to facilitate you on the journey of you discovering and deciding that for yourself.
Yeah. Okay. That's really cool. So here's the thing I've noticed about myself, I just think is interesting. When I'm really focused on what someone's saying, like, I have this moment of like, oh, okay. Oh, wait, I have to ask a question. So, so I really love everything about this. And I feel like it's such a good complement to people who are already in their human design journey, but it's just such a good standalone book as well. And I really think it's something that, I hope, more and more people will discover and start to read. And maybe a few from this podcast will be drawn to it. I loved the story you told about a gentleman who had a lot of sensing circuitry, and you with the violin story. Do you remember, would you mind telling that briefly? I just think it's a good example of conditioning and how it can be helpful just to be aware of your design.
Yeah. He was actually part of a family, a couple that had come to me for support. And he is really pretty typical in the sense that he was very high powered, super strong manifesting generator, 3420, really had highly developed his left brain, worked with doctors, with physicians. And they always came from a, scientific, very left brain orientation. And he was very disconnected from his emotions, didn't really know what he felt most of the time. And he was kind of he was not clear about what was going on in the inner landscape, let me put it that way. And his partner was like, the inner landscape matters. How, can you get in touch with that? So that was kind of part of our dialogue. And there were things about her about accepting him and understanding him. But anyway, that was the context, right? So I ran his chart, and the guy has so much of the sensing circuit. So he had, the beginning, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was a lot. And actually not that much logic to find in his chart. This is a great example of how people can develop their ability to the qualities in the system that they don't have definition in. We see this a lot with people with logic. But anyway, I said this to him. I was like, you have so much creative, embodied, expansive, experiential energy. I'm like, and he goes, well, I don't know. I'm not really that way. And I'm like, well, when you were a kid, did you like to draw, or did you like to dance, or did you play an instrument, or, did you like to build forts? What did you like to do as a kid? And he was like, I played the violin when I was a kid. I was like, really? Yeah. And he goes, I got really good at it. I was like, oh, and do you play now? He's like, oh, I haven't played for many years. And I'm like, why not? And he's like, well, I got to a certain point, I think probably middle school-ish, maybe high school. He was like, yeah, the guys started really teasing me for playing the violin. Like it wasn't a thing that guys do. It was like a girly thing. And he was like, and it became clear to me that I had a choice to make, like which way I was going to go. And he went the left brain way. And he really developed that capacity, and he let that all go. And I just was like, you have superpowers waiting for you to awaken and activate and embody them here in the sensing circuit. If you choose to. I said, but it's not random that you got really good at the violin. It's actually in your design. And I said, so that is something you could go back to, or you could choose to explore it in a different way. But I just want you to know this will help balance out that part of you that's really, logical, analytical, strategic, always wants to fix things, always is like, okay, there's an issue, let's just take care of it. Like there are other ways of being. And this is, you actually have the capacity for this. You're just not using it. And he was like, wow, I had no idea. I'm like, yeah, I know. But it's one of the really cool things about human design. Yeah.
So he started playing the violin again? No?
No, he did not. But he did start just paying more attention to what could be creative.
Right.
He did start looking for how he could be more expansive. And of course, the emotional solar plexus is the sensing circuit runs through the emotional solar plexus, and it does not, the logic circuit does not, right? So for him, it was an important awakening for him to start tuning into his emotional life, right? And the sensing circuit can definitely help do that because it's emotional.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm really distracted by this crystal in my window that at this time of day has decided it's going to shine directly on my forehead. So I love my crystals in the window. I refuse to move them. And they seem to just come up at certain times that
looks to me like you're getting a rainbow light blessing.
Right? There we go. It's going right into my pineal, right?
There you go.
Okay. So like I said, it's a little distracting though. So, okay. So the book is amazing. And that's obviously been a big focus, but you're doing some other stuff too right now. What can you tell us a little bit about some of the other stuff you're doing?
Yeah, I have an online community. It's called the Becoming Sovereign Quantum Retreat Center. And so I have an online community. I do regular events and so on inside of that community. It's free to join. And then there are programs that are available there that you can invest in. And the thing I just did last week was a Sacral authority and response workshop where I talked about those aspects, but then I also did demonstrations with, I think, 6 different people where I just did 10 minutes helping them get in touch with their sacral authority and helping them to make a decision about something or to kind of unpack something. And it's funny, I realized when I was doing it, I was going, well, I have a whole method for doing this, which is not something I learned from my teacher or anything. It's really is like kind of my combination between what I've learned and then what I know from my years of mentoring people, right? Teaching and mentoring and coaching people, and then also my intuition. But I felt really good about it. I love it when people get in touch with their sacral response. One person was like, she was like, it's so simple and clear. Like, it is. When you get out of, all of this conversation that's going on and you can access, because I gave them a tool to help them get out of the thinking mind and more into the intuitive body. And once they do that, they're like, wow. And then immediately the mind comes in and goes, yeah, but what about this? Or what about that? But that's the conversation that we had. And then I have a program that I'm offering in March called the Sacral Skills Lab, where we're going to really dive in over 3 sessions and people are going to build their skills in that. So that's an example of something that I do. I also offer Kundalini yoga deconditioning sessions inside of that community. I also have that on my YouTube channel. I do a monthly transit report. I used to do them for every single transit for 3 years. And then I was like, okay, that's enough. So now I'm doing them monthly, but it's been great. I still like doing them. I still find a lot from the transit reports. People still really, there was one point I threatened to stop doing them and I got all these people saying, no, don't stop, please. I rely on your transit reports. So I was like, okay. That was really nice to hear. So I do that. I have an Embody Your Human Design certification program that's going to start in the summer, and go for the second half of the year. So I have a variety of different things, and I'm starting to build some things for people in relation to the book too. So I'm always creating. I'm a very prolific creator. It's in my design.
You're a generator, right? You're here to build things.
Yeah, and I have the 34.
Yeah. So this Embody Your Human Design certification, I'd love to hear a little bit about that because it's not just a traditional read a chart kind of.
No, it's not at all. Yeah. So it includes the fundamentals of human design that I have previously developed in my Activate Your Superpowers Understanding Human Design program. And that one is what it sounds like, right? It's going through all the kind of fundamental aspects of the system and teaching about that. Which is a really useful system and a useful program. And people, I've done it, I think maybe 3 or 4 years. I've been offering that. But this last year, I did a program in Embodying Your Human Design. And so now I'm putting them together. And the Embody Your Human Design is really based on this understanding I was talking about earlier, which is that only 30% of our ways of knowing are logical. And then another 30% are creative and embodied. And then another 40% is intuitive, right? So I was like, well, okay, if we really take that on, how do we then relate to our human design? So there's a lot of intentional creativity in it. So this is a system that I've actually been doing for over 20 years, using painting as an evolutionary tool for healing and for development and for understanding ourselves. And so this is right smack in the sensing circuit, right? Is the creativity that comes through the sensing circuit. And then we also work a lot with intuition. And I use the Kundalini yoga to help us get into a state, change our state to where we're in an expansive state, quiet mind, so that our intuition comes online much stronger. And so we do those practices regularly. Gosh, do I have, hold on. Didn't know you were going to do. 1 second. Just to give you a little example of something that we did. This is an altarpiece where we use intentional creativity for this. Was this kind of like the crowning piece of this program. So this one was welcome, and this was belonging. And then people got to design them any way they wanted to. And then inside, well, actually on the back was what has your back. And then this is what is emerging. And what is falling away, right? And how am I holding myself, right? This is like an affirmative piece about myself.
Yeah.
So this is a way that we used intentional creativity and worked with this. Some people picked certain gates that they wanted that were related to these things. We also wrote about it. We also... Actually, this might more. Sorry, I wasn't totally prepared for this piece.
You're okay.
But this is an example of how this is my knowing circuit. And what I did is I colored in the dark green parts are the parts that I have defined in my chart. And then the light green parts are gates that I have developed a strong relationship with, even though they're open in my chart. And I had people in my program who really didn't know much about human design. And I gave them this blank chart. They got their chart. They got the chart of the knowing circuit, and they looked at it, and they and they were like, wow. And I just said, don't even look up the gates. I'm like, just gaze at it. What are you getting from this? What is it transmitting to you? And people had all kinds of like downloads just from doing that process. So for me, it's about how do we actually really utilize what the system is teaching us? Because the system is teaching us that intuition is actually our number one way of knowing, and that creativity is just as important as logic. So I'm like, well, if the system is showing us that, then how are we actually living it, right? And so that's what the Embody Your Human Design program is about.
When does that start?
Yeah.
When is it?
So you'll be able to start getting on the waiting list for it in June, and then it'll start in August. Yeah, maybe in July. I'll see.
That sounds really exciting. Mm-hmm. So you got up several times for a reason, and I think it was so we could get a better view of the beautiful artwork behind it. And I'm wondering, now, did you create both of those pieces?
Yeah. And that's the cover of my book.
Yes. And I'd love if you, would if you wouldn't mind telling us the story behind that painting. Was
this one?
When you were painting it, it was going to be the cover of your book, or did you? Okay.
Yeah. Okay. No, I actually, so it's intentional creativity is we paint with intention, right? It doesn't always mean we end up with a painting, like we're focusing on the end product of the painting, because some of them can be just process.
Right.
But for this one, I was like, okay, I'm going to paint the cover. I wasn't even going to paint the cover of my book until my book coach and my best friend told me that I needed to. And then I was like, oh, okay. And then I was like, well, what is it going to be? And I didn't really know. And then I got this impression of a fairy circle, which is what this is. So for those of you who might not exactly know, these are redwood trees. Okay. These are redwood trees. And when you redwood trees often grow in circles, right? And so there's a bunch of them. You can lie down in a side of a fairy circle, and this is what you see. You look up and you see all the the trunks and then the leaves way, 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 way up there. Do you know that redwood trees literally have millions of leaves?
Wow.
Millions. It's amazing. So then I was like, oh, and then I was like, oh, those are my pillars. Those are my pillars. So then I started sketching it, and then this is what came out. So this is where it happened. And then actually, you haven't gotten to this part yet, but in pillar 7, there is that, because every one of the pillars has a little story that goes at the beginning that kind of illustrates what's it like when you've mastered the energy of this pillar. And in the very beginning of that, there's a story where our main character starts out in a fairy circle. And so she's looking at that. And I was like, oh, okay. But this came to me totally intuitively. Like, I didn't plan it. I wasn't thinking, oh, it needs to be trees. But as soon as it came in, I was like, oh yeah, that's what it is. So
I love that it's also a flower. Like, when you look at it one way, it's this flower, right? This turquoise flower with the yellow pollen at the center. And then as you look at it, you say, oh, those are trees. And that's either the moon or the sun, depending on, because it's that color of sky that could really kind of be both. So yeah.
Well, and what's funny, Kathy, is, so this part that you're referring to, right? This was like the background. So a lot of times when we do intentional creativity, there's many layers because each layer has an intention, right? And so this was a layer that had to do with a vortex. So there's a vortex behind this part of the painting, and this is part of the vortex. And so I painted the vortex, and then this painting, this part of the painting went on top of it. And then I was planning on turning this more into sky, like blue. Right. But I looked at it and I talked to a couple, and they're like, oh, no, you got to keep that because it's so amazing. But this is one of those examples of how I did not intend that part of it. I had my intentions, but that was a surprise, right? But that's one of the things I love, is when you let go of needing to control it, right? Needing to say, it's going to be exactly the way I decide, and allow something else, the mystery, to come in and kind of guide you. Then you get things like this, right? Because then I looked at it and I was like, oh my gosh, it's a flower. I never intended to paint a flower. Right. But there it is. Right. It's very interesting. It's one of the things I love about intentional creativity is, yes, we get to have our human part that has intentions, and we work with that. But then there's the other part of us that's open to the mystery, where things come in and you're like, wow, that was miraculous. What is it showing me? What is it teaching me?
And I think that's a great metaphor for life, when we're not trying to control things and have a narrow, rigid idea of what the outcome's going to be. We open ourselves up for all sorts of unexpected beauty in life. And if you're listening to this later on podcast format, I'll put in the notes, there'll be a link to, you have a website for your book, right? Maggie will put that in there. And so you'll be able to see the artwork because it's the cover of the book.
Yeah. And also there's also this does interest you, there's a little video at the bottom of that page where I document the creating the painting. If this is something that interests you. Yeah. There's cool. A little video down there, and there's also a full picture of the original painting. And also there's a sample if you're curious about this, you can just get a sample of the book on my site if you want. Of course, you can go buy it too, but you can get the first like 40 pages or something if you just want to check it out, get the table of contents, and then you can kind of see what's in it. Yeah.
It's really a wonderful book, and I really have been enjoying it, and we'll probably read some more of it this afternoon. Well, it's a beautiful day. I might read some more of it this evening.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, I really have been enjoying it. So, so I just am looking at the time here, and we've already talked a little bit about your transit reports, your stuff that you've got going on. And so if people want to connect with you, what's the best way for that?
Yeah, well, I do have a really active YouTube channel. So if you just look for Maggie Ostara Human Design on YouTube, it'll come right up. And there's, 250 videos or something. There's a lot of videos.
Yeah.
Well, that's a great kind of educational source if you're interested in that. I'm also on Instagram and Facebook if you want to find me there. And then, femininesovereigntybook.com is the site for the book. And Sovereignty by Design is my human design site. So those are all places you can come and find me. And like I said, you can get a copy of the first 40 pages if you want, just as a sample. And if you buy the book through the femininesovereigntybook.com, then we know that you've gotten it, and then we will be in touch with you with different bonuses and offers and, things like that, as you choose to. Or you can just go get it on Amazon if you want to do it that way.
And then do you have somewhere that people can sign up for a mailing list so they can find out about your wait list is that on your website?
Well, I have an ebook series, which is called Getting Started with Human Design, and then the Reflection Journal. And that's usually the way people come in through because I always like to give a gift. I actually don't have a way you can just sign up for it without a gift. I always give a gift. So one is the book sample. That would be one way. The other is if you go to sovereigntybydesign.com/ebook.
Okay.
That's where the Getting Started with Human Design, it's also on the front page of my site, but that's where you can get that ebook series. And if you get that, then you'll be in my community. Yeah.
Awesome. Because I know that everyone's going to want to sign up for that Embody Your Design course. That sounds amazing.
Mm-hmm. Because isn't it, Kathy, this is how we really actually change our lives, is when we take what we're learning and we integrate it and we embody it. Right.
Especially in ways that are fun. And what's more fun than playing with paint and stuff like that, right? Yeah. So that's really awesome. So every week we share stories of how my guests have come to understand themselves in a more loving and empowering way through the lens of human design. How you think and speak about yourself matters. Human design can show you the reframe of not only your own story, but the story you tell about your relationships. If you'd like to start living a better story, I'd love to help guide you through the process of fully embodying who you came here to be. I invite you to follow Real Human Design Stories on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform. And to work with me, you can set up a discovery call at kathybashanko.com. Thanks so much, Maggie. I really have loved every moment of this conversation.
Thank you, Kathy. Thanks for asking me. It was delightful. And thanks for everybody who's been here and who's going to check this out later.
Okay, great. Peace out, everybody.